The first thing I want to dive into with you is really why you were drawn to human design and called to work with it in the first place. If you could give us some highlights of your story.
Sure. Well, human design kind of fell into my lap. I'd been studying astrology for I guess, probably about 20 years before I found human design. And an astrologer friend of mine invited me to look at it, kind of just tossed it over to me. And my first impression was, oh no, not another system. I'd been kind of immersed in several different systems of astrology, and this one seemed really kind of weird and complex. It's pulling in like the chakra centers. It had this whole body graph that I'd never seen before, the I Ching. And I think it was, when I just started reading what it meant to be a projector, which is my auric type, that it just really hit me. And it ended up kind of being like a missing link or a puzzle piece for some things that I'd been really trying to work out in my own life, and trying to understand certain experiences that I had had that are kind of different than a lot of what other people were experiencing. And the more I read about what it meant to be a projector, it just started kind of clicking. And I was looking back, reviewing a lot of, my previous years, and it just started making sense. And then that was kind of enough inspiration to go deeper and start kind of trying to understand what this system was, which is kind of a projector thing to do. And I had been meeting with clients using astrology, and I'd been kind of, I'd found a lot of value and worth working with astrology over the years, but there was like something missing. I felt like there was something that I couldn't quite get traction with the people I was working with. And human design kind of filled that place for me. And over time, as I started going deeper into the system, I realized that was really what I wanted to do more of. I wanted to really work with human design in that context. And then it's just kind of, it took on a life of its own. And this is like 6 years later, and I'm still studying, still working with people, and still exploring the system, and, trying to make sense of it in my life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful stuff. I wonder, especially I'm a projector as well. So I wonder this idea of coming to systems, because I know for me, I am constantly like over looking for systems. Like I'm always trying to look at the next system. Okay, how does this make sense to me? And how can I use this to figure people out and figure myself out? Is that something that is part of being a projector?
I think so. I think, one of the things that's talked about in human design when it comes to projectors is that we're really here to share our awareness. We're not really here to kind of orient to the world in terms of what we're creating, producing, what we're generating. That's more correct for 2/3 of the population, which are the generators who have that energy. So projectors, you could say that we have inconsistent access to that type of energy to produce, work, create. And instead, it's almost like we're kind of positioned to share our awareness in our understanding of mastering a certain system or a field of expertise as a way of kind of coaching or guiding others. The projector orientation is very much on the other person. And that kind of is the fundamental projector question is who is the other? Where for generators, it's who am I? Who am I for myself? And so,
Let's go into what human design is and what the types are before we get too much into that. That way everyone...
the basics.
Everyone kind of more, because I bet a lot of people listening have just scratched the surface. Yeah. So maybe you could talk about it in a way, like almost like a way as if people are just hearing about it for the first time.
Sure. So it is you could say it's a astrological related system, in that it's forming a birth chart that's based on the time, place, and date of birth. And so it's really describing this kind of planetary imprint. So you could kind of introduce it as something like astrology. But once you kind of get past that point, it's a very different system than astrology. And I think one of the things that human design really emphasizes is how unique each of us are. Like, one of the taglines of human design is the science of differentiation, just showing us a map of how varied, how unique each one of us are. And so I think you can see some of that in astrology, but the thing that really sets human design apart, I think, is its focus on form consciousness. Human design has a secondary set of planetary positions. It's like a secondary chart within the body graph, the birth chart. So there's really like 2 points in time. And if you're looking at a body graph, if you've seen it, the positions of the planets that are in black are going to be, they're based on the time and date that you were born, your birth date. going 3 months back, to the beginning of the third trimester of the pregnancy, you get the imprint of the form, which is showing you the characteristics that your body is carrying. And so much of human design is about kind of looking at the whole person between mind and body, and then directing us back to our form consciousness, the innate intelligence or truth within ourselves, which is really anchored in our bodies. And so that's kind of a
spirit is another word for it. Soul or spirit is what it's leading.
Right.
Okay.
I think you would look to like the personality or the black activations for the part of us that comes in and kind of inhabits the body, the form. It's the awareness that drops in, which we would probably associate with, spirit, I think. Okay. And so, yeah, that's kind of the quick overview of it.
Yeah. So it does have these different, I know we're going to go into the different sections of when you're looking at your own design chart. And by the way, before you came on, John, we asked our audience to go grab their human design chart, and so they could have something in front of them to be looking at, because otherwise we're just talking. They have no idea what we're talking about here. So I guess, well, Jade, let's go ahead and move in on the different types here.
Yeah, let's talk about the different types. And I know Mercedes is a projector, like we mentioned. I'm a generator. The one that doesn't often get mentioned is the reflector, since I think they're only like 1%, but I met one yesterday. So yeah, let's go into the types, since everyone listening, if they may be one type, but they're probably living with another type. So it benefits us to hear about them all. So
yeah, that's true. I mean, we're going to have some exposure to all the different auric types or energetic types. And like you said, the reflector is pretty rare. That's the one that's about 1% of the population. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about type in human design, it's a little bit different than other typing systems like Myers-Briggs or these type of personality typing systems. Even astrology, if it's kind of based on the personality, it's describing more that what we would be consciously aware of. But when we talk about type in human design, we're talking about our bioenergetic field, that how our energy works. It's basically set into a certain pattern. And that's what we mean by type. So you have, for example, 2/3 of the population, which is of this type called generator. And then there's a subtype of manifesting generator. And that's kind of a aura, a bioenergetic field that's this enveloping, radiating, energetic field that's designed to kind of pull life to it. It's very magnetic, it's receptive, and it's designed to interface with life as it's happening and kind of pull things into it. Where if you go to my type as a projector, we're about 20% of the population, so 1 in 5 people, and it's a very different type of aura. It's also receptive and absorbing, but it's very focused and penetrating. Projectors tend to really do best when they have something to put their attention on. Like, what is the focus? So you see like projectors more comfortable in one-to-one interactions than like dealing with a group where it's hard to find the focus. And as I mentioned before, each type kind of has a kind of a fundamental question. The fundamental question for the generator is who am I? And what kind of comes with that is, how am I using my energy for myself? Where the projectors will tend to really focus on the other. Who is the other? And I'll learn about myself through these relationships. So you can see projectors who become very either focused or kind of going really deep into relationships. And then there's, of course, 10% of the population, roughly, this type called manifestor. And manifestors are those who are really here to initiate things, start things, to catalyze a new process or to kick something off. And the manifestor aura is kind of designed to be, I would say, independent in a way, to not be influenced very easy, not to be interfered with. And that kind of allows them to kind of move through the world in a way that they can really act on their vision without interference. And so that it's sometimes said that the manifestor aura is kind of repelling, which kind of sounds negative.
Yeah, I read that.
It's like moving stuff out of the way. It's like, it's with the manifestor, it's kind of like, get with the program or move out of the way. And
I was reading too that they're like the most likely to be the ones conditioned by their parents, because you're like trying to change them from being that
right
abrasive or whatever the word would be.
Well, they're not meant to be controlled. I mean,
right.
The generator and projector types are a lot more interactive. We're, that's not to say that manifestors aren't interactive, but relatively speaking, it's really for a manifestor to kind of have their own program, their own, depending on what their authority is and what their design is, to kind of move through the world in an independent way. And I think with kids, with what we normally think of as parenting, it's like there's a lot of control in place. Like, you should do this, don't do that. And
knowing their design types is really helpful because it helps you allow them to be who they're actually meant to be.
Exactly. And I feel like that's one of the biggest gifts of human design is, being able to raise our kids according to their design and support them in who they actually are, as opposed to like kind of putting whatever our trip is on them, which, in human design is kind of looked at as conditioning or homogenization, where there's like this kind of blanket approach to things and everyone needs to follow it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my life I've spent attempting to be a manifestor before knowing anything about human design, and really pushing. And that would be definitely the word I would use. I was like literally pushing, all the boulders in my life uphill, like just struggling to make things happen. And the most beautiful thing that human design has brought to my life so far is knowing my strategy of wait for the invitation, because I could see in my interactions with people that my aura was too penetrating if it wasn't invited. And if I didn't wait for that invitation, it was repelling. Like, people did not want to be around my overtness, to say.
Yep.
So that has been huge for me. So if someone else is listening and they find out, oh, I'm a projector, and maybe they've had that similar experience of feeling like they're too much. I think that's really a lot of what it felt like for me. Being able to relax a little and not having to manifest it all.
And I think the reason why like my 3 closest girlfriends are projectors is because I do love to get advice. And so I'm like an open invite to them, because their whole thing is like waiting for the invite. And so it's like,
you ask for it a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's why I get along with projectors so well.
Yeah. And you're both bringing up an interesting point with this, what's called strategy in human design, because that goes right along with type. So strategy comes from your auric type. Generators, who are the creators, builders, producers, maintainers of the world, their strategy is to wait to respond, which means with their receptive magnetic generator aura that's designed to pull life to them, everything's going to work best. They're going to find the most satisfaction, the least resistance, the most flow when they have something to respond to, something specific that their body can kind of, resonate with or engage with in a certain way that feels good to the generator in terms of how they're engaging with life. And so it's kind of like what you were saying, Mercedes, where if we're all in this like constant manifestation, push mode, it really kind of takes us out of the natural order of things. We start, operating from the mind and the head and according to what we think should happen or what other people say works for them, or this is how you do it. And I feel like that kind of takes us away from ourselves in a way that's kind of healthy and functional. But it also, I think, takes us away from the natural order of life, how things work. You kind of have to meet the conditions of life as they're coming in. And so strategy can kind of be looked at as like a bit of a kind of a mind interrupt, a tool that we can use to take a moment or give pause to that, the mind's incessant kind of need to control things or direct the life. And then the projector strategy of waiting for the invitation is even more specific. It's waiting for that specific recognition that's coming in from another person, where the projector can really show up with themselves or as themselves with a recognition of their gifts and who and what they are, and not have to compromise that. And in that exchange, there's a lot that can happen. So I like to kind of say that, like with projectors and generators, we can manifest, but we're going to do it by invitation or in response, or you could say collaboratively. Like, we're going to do it in a process, as opposed to the manifestor who's just running out there and then kicking something off, making it happen. And then what the manifestor kind of lacks is the follow through, the energy to continue building that or sustaining that activity.
Yeah, beautiful. And you put it in such gentler terms, because the way I've been looking at it is that I like to call myself an aware vampire, not just, so essentially I have to think about the fact that I am kind of earning my energy from interaction with others and also bouncing it back to them if it's a healthy exchange. But I have to know those boundaries so that I'm not draining the people I'm around like a vampire. So if I could be aware vampire, that's my goal.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I was just curious if the manifesting generators, is it basically manifestors and generators combined, or is it a completely different thing?
That's a good question. look at the manifesting generators as a subtype of generator, or a variation on the generator theme. The reason being is that if you have a defined sacral center, so if you're looking at the body graph, it's the second square from the bottom that will be colored in red, then that means that you have consistent access to this creative, vital life force energy that we use to produce, reproduce, to work, build, and you're designed to use that. It's healthy for you to use that energy doing those things. It also sets your aura into this receptive, enveloping aura that's designed to meet life directly. But what a manifesting generator has that a pure generator doesn't is in the body graph, one of the body's motors connected to the throat. So that would be either the sacral center, the solar plexus, the ego, or the root through another center. And what that gives is manifesting potential in response. So once something shows up, once life presents a manifesting generator with something, that could be a text, a phone call, they could see something outside the window. We have a lot of things we can respond to. But once there's an energetic connection with what's happening, what we see with manifesting generators is they have this ability to bring things into form a lot more quickly. They can kind of just go right to it, where a pure generator would tend to kind of have to follow the steps, kind of to stay in the flow of response, like responding to the next thing and the next thing. And so manifesting generators are kind of like a hybrid. They're a generator, but they have this manifesting component to them.
And the way that I read it too was that, like, this may be incorrect, but like a generator and a manifesting generator, the manifesting generator is going quicker, but because they have to go back and correct their mistakes because they're going so fast, they still end up at the same place at the same time.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Mercedes' husband is a manifesting generator, right?
Yeah.
They're often powerhouses. There's a lot of energy, a lot of potential there, depending on their design. And it can be really hard to slow down for manifesting generators because there's so much potential and there's so much energy to work with if they have a design like that. And so if they get out of their response, so they're something comes in and then they just go and run with it, they may actually skip steps or kind of move things along the way because they're off and running. But if they can kind of stay grounded and connected to that response as they're going through, I think it tends to work better, and you'll see that they'll still kind of bring things into form kind of more quickly, I think.
Okay. So we're getting into stuff that right now, because Jade and I are in this work and in this system already. I think we're privy to understanding a bit, but I know the listener is going like, wait, hold on. Okay. So we just discussed, a lot of the different, all the different types, manifesting generators.
Did we cover reflectors?
Not yet.
No. Yeah. Let's hit reflectors. And then what I want to do is get us into that space of being able to just talk about the different sections of the chart and why they exist, what they're for.
Okay. So reflectors, roughly 1% of the population. What you'll see in a reflector chart is that there are no channels defined. There are
my gosh.
It's all white, and there's just a bunch of gate activations, like the little numbers, the hexagrams in there will be activated, but they have nothing fixed and consistent in their design, which is kind of a key point in understanding how human design works. Is there's this concept of definition, and definition is what's colored in through the channels and centers, and that represents what kind of fixes our energy into a reliable, consistent pattern. It kind of defines how our energy works. It sets our auric type, our strategy, our authority, which is our decision-making process. And if you look at that in the context of a reflector chart, there is no consistency. I mean, there are a couple like signposts and markers that they can use. And if I'm working with a reflector, that's what we'll go to. We'll go to whatever is a good point of reference to while they're moving through this sea of just constant change and inconsistency. And they're really just a different breed. They're meant to kind of stand outside of everything and be almost like a kind of objective or impartial observer of things, very group oriented. But yeah, it's a whole different ballgame with reflectors.
And you said that's about 1% of the population?
1% of the population.
Okay.
And just to finish up the thoughts real quick on strategy, the reflector strategy is to basically wait, a 28-day moon cycle, like a month, which is really saying slow down, give things time, go through your own process, because over that course of the month, what will happen is they're going to have a lot of interactions with people. They're going to have a lot of kind of input from the planetary field, the transit field, and they're going to experience different parts of their definition turning on. And through that process, they'll eventually come to some sort of awareness or clarity about the truth of whatever it is they're considering. And so that's the reflector strategy, is to wait the full moon cycle. And then the manifestor strategy, which is kind of more like a courtesy call than an actual strategy, because manifestors don't really have to wait for anything outside of themselves to act. They may have to wait for their own internal process to move, but their strategy is to inform, which I think of as good proactive communication. When a manifestor is clear on what they're doing or what their impact is going to be through whatever action they're going to take, it can be really helpful to put others at ease and kind of let people relax in the face of their independence or their unilateral kind of action. And so the informing strategy just kind of like eases and relaxes, whomever is going to be impacted by it. So to be kind of upfront with where they're coming from and, proactively communicate.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about setting expectations for them. A lot of it is. Yeah. That makes sense with when we talk about my husband having that manifestor in him, for sure.
That's a good point. I find that manifesting generators, they can also benefit from this strategy of informing. I've seen it quite a bit, where it's not just about responding, but when you go into action, it's like, go ahead and tell people what you're doing and it'll work better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we still have a bunch of sections on a chart that are unknowns at this point to us, right? So talked about strategies here. We talked about the energetic type. What about, maybe we can get a little more definition on what authority means, and then signature and the not self themes.
Yeah. Those are all good fundamental components of human design to discuss. Authority is referred to as inner authority in human design, and it's in contrast to outer authority. I think a lot of what people do and what we all have to work with on some level is really looking outside of ourselves for answers. Like, what should I do? How does this work? And that's not to say that we can't learn from others or learn from the outside or learn from experience or the past. But what human design is really pointing us to in a very unique way is our own inner truth. And it's this truth that operates within the form, within the body, within the vehicle that we've come with. And so inner authority is going to be oriented around a particular function. Like, for example, half the population is emotionally defined. They have a defined solar plexus. And if the solar plexus is defined, that means that you have an emotional process of coming to
That's me.
truth. Yes.
Yeah.
That's you. And so there's guidance along those lines of slow down, be patient, go through several cycles of feeling or emotion around something until some relative clarity emerges. And so that we can get more specific if we're looking at a chart, but that's the general idea for an emotional authority. The other big one is the sacral authority, where if the emotional center, the solar plexus, is not defined, then the sacral, if this is for generators and manifesting generators, means that the navigation system for generators and manifesting generators who do not have an emotional definition is that gut response to life, that energetic resonance with things, is a point of reference inside themselves that says, is this activity for me? Or is this something that's going to bring satisfaction or be healthy or good for me in my life? And so that's another common authority, is the sacral authority. And then for manifestors and for projectors, you'll also see the splenic authority, which is the other center down on the bottom left of the body graph, opposite the solar plexus on the bottom right. And that's kind of the opposite of the solar plexus. The spleen is this instinctive awareness center that has to do with our sensory intelligence in our body, our instincts, our intuitions, just kind of how things feel to our body, and it's oriented around our health, our well-being, our survival, and it's very spontaneous. It operates in the moment. So this is like kind of, again, the opposite of the solar plexus or emotional authority, where you would always want to make decisions in the now, versus the solar plexus authority, which is saying, don't make decisions in the now. And so just there on the surface of the chart, if you have a sense of, your design, and you can already kind of like work with it on a very kind of simple level and say, oh, I've got an emotional authority, let me give it time. Or I have a splenic authority, if you're a projector or manifestor, because they're the two types that would have that, then I'm always in the now. My truth is always in the moment.
Why does Mercedes have no authority?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, this is the part of the conversation where I start going, I have no authority. My chart is all, all my motor systems are white here. So if you can see the chart, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So that's a mental projector chart. And what that is showing us is that there's no consistency below the throat. So when we go down kind of below the throat into the body, into the form, there's nothing in there that is consistently operating in a reliable way, because you're going to be very receptive there, taking on the energy of whomever you're interacting with. And so if you were trying to kind of operate from these lower centers in there, then it's not really coming from you. And so the way I look at the no authority question for mental projectors is that there's some variations on this theme depending on the design, but with your design, because you have the ajna connected to the throat, the ajna is right above the throat and it's connected to the throat center. That's what's called a sounding board authority, which can be a process where you basically interact with your closest friends, or you're just talking to people and you're watching what spontaneously comes out of your voice. So your voice becomes kind of an anchor point, a voice that's expressing your awareness. And I would say it's a process oriented authority, kind of like the solar plexus, in that, over the course of time, as you're talking it out with different people, it's not so much that you're asking for advice as you're having the opportunity to hear what comes out of your mouth as you're speaking, and then also see what comes up in your body as you're taking in their energy. And so it's again kind of a authority that takes time and patience, and it's pretty subtle, so it can be kind of tricky to be a mental projector. You've got a very specific definition. It's very other oriented, and yet you're so open, and you're kind of just dependent on the energy that's coming in from the environment and from others. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think when you say it as a sounding board, especially, or needing to say words out loud in order to almost hear back what that, if that resonates for me, or if that's, oh yeah, that is exactly what I mean. And then it refines my articulation, right? And I can get to a point where I feel like that's exactly what I want to say. Like that is the intention that I had, but it had to go through this process, like you're talking about, in order to get it to that, that exact articulation that then can make sense to the other or resonate with the other.
Yeah.
So, and mental projectors is like another 1%er, right? So it's not something as big an issue out there. Yeah. So compassion out there for all those mental projectors.
And then, okay, so we talked about authority. Should we talk about not self themes? Do you think that would be helpful?
The not self themes are also associated with your auric type. So the not self theme for a generator is frustration. And I think of these not self themes as not something that's necessarily negative, but again, another type of signpost or point of reference for us. So the way I understand the not self theme is like, if we're making kind of decisions in a way that's not really based on who or what we are, if we're operating kind of from trying to be something different than ourselves, in which in the body graph looks like not following your authority or your strategy and operating from decision making in the open centers. But if you're doing that, the way that a generator is probably going to meet the world is through some sort of resistance. They're using their energy, they're out there spending a lot of effort, they're working, and yet they don't have a lot to show for themselves. It's like there's this kind of experience of frustration that comes up, like, I'm doing all this and I'm not really getting anywhere. It's not satisfying. It's not, it's not really working very well.
I guess that's why I can't do a normal job.
For you.
Yeah.
And that's such a key point for generators, is to start with that kind of that self-focus. Like, who am I and how am I using my energy for me? What feels good or satisfying? That's like the signature of a generator, is this signature of satisfaction, using your energy in a way that feels rewarding. And so frustration is kind of the opposite of that. For projectors, this is a fun one, but it's bitterness as the not self theme. You can think of bitterness as kind of like resentment. Projectors really feed on recognition, like being seen, because that's really what we're here for. We're here to see the other and to be seen.
Especially since they're giving out advice.
Yeah, hopefully they're waiting to be in. Otherwise, bitterness will ensue. But yeah, so we're here to see and be seen, and that comes to this kind of currency of recognition. It's like, can someone actually get us, see us, and appreciate us for what we are? And often, projectors will have a lot of openness in their chart, although that varies by design. And so there's this potential for a lot of awareness. We're sitting around, we're watching the world or watching others or relationships, and no one's really asking, and so we get this kind of hunger for recognition to share our awareness. And I feel like the bitterness comes up as a result of of maybe being in relationships, or people just can't see us or hear us. We're sitting there and we're just kind of waiting all the time, and this kind of sense of resentment builds up, and it tastes it's like a bad taste in the mouth.
Like the invitation never comes or something.
The invitation never comes, or we're out there running around trying to be a generator or a manifester, and then we're getting exhausted. We're finding out that it's not actually getting us anywhere. Maybe our bodies are complaining, or our health is breaking down, and then there's this type of like general resentment to life, to the situation, to the others, and it usually will kind of get bottled up. Projectors will sit on it for a while and then just take it in and carry it with them, and until it just finally gets to the point where it just comes out. I kind of refer to it as like, the bitch nozzle. When it opens up, it's just, get out of the way. It's going to be sharp and penetrating, and the poor person who's in front of us at that moment.
It's literally projecting all over the world. So what do we do, John, situation when we're not being seen?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think it's pointing back to this, this question of timing in the right conditions. For projectors, that means the right relationships. I think relationships can make all the difference to projectors. The right ones can put us into a trajectory or in a new direction in life where everything just works really well. We have this signature of success, this success of actually having a life of our own and not being exhausted, being recognized. Success will look different for each person, but a lot of it's going to come through the invitation, through relationships. So there's this question of waiting for that. And oftentimes I'm asked, like when I'm working with people, like, well, what do I do when I'm waiting? Does it mean I'm just sitting around all the time waiting for someone to ask? And it's not quite like that. It's not like that you have to be invited to do the laundry, or you have to be invited to go get a cup of coffee, or whatever. We're really talking about kind of the big things in life that can really shape our life and direction, like invited into a new job or profession, or invited into a new location in terms of moving, or a new relationship. They're all based on that type of recognition and something being there for us on the other side. And so I think that there's a little bit of a struggle, for all of us, especially the types that are always 90% of the population is playing a waiting game. And what can we do in the meantime? I like to use the metaphor of kind of being more of a lighthouse than a search party. If the projector aura is this kind of focused and penetrating kind of energy field that's really looking at the other person, if we're running around, shining our floodlight in everyone's face, it's kind of like you were saying, Mercedes, people are like, hey, I'm not asking for that. That's too much. I don't want that. But if we're kind of like centered or grounded or kind of aligned with ourselves, then I feel like we can just keep watching. We can look, we can be that lighthouse where there's awareness, there's a light shining out there. And eventually we're going to draw the right relationships, opportunities, or experiences to ourselves just by being ourselves. It's like the more we align with who we really are, we're sending out kind of a more clear beacon to the world, which I think will ultimately bring in what we need. And so it's kind of like that is just how I see it.
Yeah, I definitely can feel that too. And I almost like the idea of taking the time that you're waiting for the invitation to really sit into the work that you feel called to. So like becoming masterful and just growing that part of you, because you can put your energy there and you can take spend your time there, so that when you do get invited to the invitation, you're really ready to shine some light wherever it's asked for. Yeah. I do want to say, and I know that I've heard anyway, I think I've heard from you in some other podcasts you've done, that projectors most often come to this work over any of the other types, come to this human design over any of the other types because they're looking for a system perhaps, and they have maybe a bigger struggle because of their specific strategy and maybe lack of authority centers and that. But I have this question that comes up whenever I hear about, needing to look for answers outside of me, or look for someone to see me in order to feel good and okay. Maybe that comes from my own conditioning, early in life. But can you address that part of where it might feel like, especially for a projector, to be that they're giving their power away in a sense by seeking external validation in that way? Am I making sense with that question? Yeah, that's something that comes up for me where I'm like, I want to be able to do this all myself and whatever, but I also know we're interdependent beings today. So yeah. Want to address that at some place of that, whatever you feel called to in there?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to this recognition piece. That what I saw in myself in my early life, and I think I've gotten a lot better about it over the last 6 years because there's awareness of that dynamic. But I would just kind of sell myself out for attention, for recognition, to be noticed, And when I was a kid, I was kind of like a class clown, and I was just trying to feed on attention and the energy coming in from others. And I feel like we all do that to some degree because we get impatient with the waiting, or we think that if I don't go out there and do something or start something, initiate something, then it's not going to happen. Like, in other words, we really don't trust in ourselves and we don't trust in life. And so I feel like, we will just tend to compromise ourselves. We'll sell ourselves out in some way. And what that often looks like is we'll show up and we'll volunteer ourselves in a way that's not really healthy for us. Let me tell you, let me help you, let me share my awareness with you, or look what I'm going to do for you will often show up in jobs and certain, relationships as generators, like, based on I'm going to work for you, or I'm going to provide for you or do something for you in that way energetically. And I think it just sets us off on the wrong foot. And then that becomes this recipe leading to bitterness. It's like it doesn't work out very well.
That really resonates with me for sure. I'm going to sit with that for a while. I hope that helps some people that might have been in that same, mental juxtaposition that I felt in. Okay, I want to move us on to the colors in the chart and what the significance of these different colors in our, whether it be our motor centers or like where mine are in the throat or on or above. So what does the color symbolize? Because I noticed they're very bright. There's lime green, there's reds, there's gold, there's all this color.
Well, the answer I'm going to give, I don't know if it's going to be fully satisfying, but human design is essentially a channeled system, a downloaded system, or it came through this guy back in 1987 where he had this 8-day experience with what he called the voice, which I understand was kind of more visual than auditory. He was seeing things, and this information was coming into his head over this experience. He thought he'd completely lost his mind.
And that's Ra, right?
Yeah, he has the assumed name of Ra Urahu. He was a Canadian. His name was Robert Krakauer. And so he has this experience and he sees all these things. He's seeing the chart, he's seeing the wheels, he's seeing all of this kind of fit together. And when people have asked him in the past, he passed away, I think in 2011, I believe. But that was a common question. Why are the centers the color that they were? And he said, I don't know. That's what I saw. That's what the voice showed me. And so
they don't actually mean anything?
I don't know. I'm looking for the logic in it and the pattern.
Yeah.
Design is a very logical system. Everything fits together almost like a puzzle. And then you get to the colors and you're looking and trying to figure out what's the pattern there. And
nothing.
That's an open question.
Okay.
I don't know if there's.
So then I know, like you said that I have an open throat and Mercedes has a defined throat. How would someone look at that part of their chart and know? I thought it was based off colors or something. So how does someone look at their chart and know what type of throat they have? And also, what is open throat and defined throat now that people will be able to see in their own chart?
So that if you're looking at the body graph, the birth chart, you're going to see 9 different shapes in there and these lines that are connecting it. The shapes are centers and they're roughly associated with the traditional 7 chakra centers, but human design kind of looks at humanity as being in this process of evolution where we back in 1781 were basically kind of upgraded into a new form, a 9-centered form. And so that's the idea of the centers. And there are these shapes in there. They're stationary in the chart. So they're always in the same place. The throat will always be where the throat is. The head center is kind of above the crown, the ajna.
Which I know you said there's not much to work with in my head.
Luckily mine is pulled up, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Mercedes and I are pretty much opposites. So that works for our business.
Yeah.
And so the centers, those shapes and those positions will either be colored in or they'll be white. So like the ajna is always green, the throat's always kind of brown, the head's always yellow. So the colors are fixed, but they're either going to be colored or white. And the reason that they're going to be colored in is that there's a channel connecting the 2 centers, the channel that's defined by planets on either side of that channel. Okay. So your activations that are activating the channel and the 2 centers. And so anything that's colored in your chart, you could think of as your imprint. It's part of your imprint.
Which is defined.
But the definition, comes from the actual channel definition. The channels they're kind of like referred to as a quantum, where the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So you take these two things and you put it together and you get this third expression. And they're representing the life force, like how our energy is fixed into a certain pattern. So does that answer your question in terms of just seeing what's colored in versus what's white?
So when it's white, it's open, basically. Okay.
And
what does that mean, like to have an open throat or an open whatever,
whichever center?
Yeah.
Where definition represents what is fixed, consistent, and reliable for us. It's what puts our energy into that thematic or that pattern, where what's open is, you could say, conditional or circumstantial. It's inconsistent. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that you're kind of pointing to, and it's that we tend to get into trouble when we expect that what's fixed in us, what's defined, should be different than it is. Like if someone has emotional definition and you think, I wish I didn't have these strong feelings. I wish I didn't have these down points of my wave, or, so we try to make the definition something else.
Yeah.
The opposite thing happens where we start wishing we had consistency in areas that aren't designed to be consistent, or they're not designed to be fixed. Those open centers can be a great source of experience, learning, wisdom, but it's going to be influenced by whatever's happening, our relationships with the field.
So if someone is around us that makes us, like, I have an open throat. So if someone around me makes me feel more talkative, it is more dependent on the energy around me. Whereas Mercedes is a little bit talking. But that actually leads into our next question, what you were saying about, seeing our chart and wanting it to be different.
Yeah. So what does it mean if we don't feel like our chart resonates with where we're at?
Well, given that we have an exact correct birth time, because sometimes I've had some experiences where the time's off, and I'll get into like a reading or a session, I'll be talking to someone and it's like, something's not hitting here, something's off. And then I would say in all of those cases, it's come back to be like, all right, wait, no, that it was 12:30 a.m., not 12:30 p.m. or something, and something's really different. But what I've seen consistently is that if we have an exact birth time, human design tends to hold up again and again. And it often, if the person has some self-awareness, or they've been doing their own work, whatever that looks like, in whatever modalities, and relatively in line with themselves, the information that they're going to hear in human design is going to be more of a kind of a validation or a confirmation than something completely coming out of left field. That said, I've seen some situations where people are pretty far off, away from where they actually are in terms of their design. And they're living a life that is heavily conditioned. It's been influenced by their upbringing, their education, parents, peers, the world at large. And you're dealing with that in human design, which would be called kind of a not self. Someone has an orientation. They built almost like an alter ego or persona that is really based on these old kind of coping strategies, patterns of behavior that don't really represent who they are. And then in that case, it can be kind of hard to there's a lot of work and deconditioning work that needs to be done to get back to themselves. And so I don't want to make an assumption that if someone doesn't resonate with human design, then it means that there's something wrong with them. But what I've seen in my own practice and my own experience is that it tends to hold up. And usually when people hear about it, they'll recognize these patterns, these coping patterns, or these not self patterns. And they'll be like, okay, I know what you're talking about. I need to look at this.
Yeah, they'll be able to feel that there is truth in there that they just have been trying to shove themselves into some other box.
Or that they've been conditioned by, like, I know for me, I'm meant to, as a generator, I'm meant to allow my energy, like, to almost like draw things to me. Like, generators are supposed to be very magnetic, right? So like our aura fields draw things to us. And however, like, our culture is very much that of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like, work hard and like force things almost. And so I think too, if you, as a generator, if you feel, just as an example, if you feel like you don't draw things to you or you're uncomfortable with that, it might be like the conditioning of our culture. That's just an example of maybe something that may not feel resonant.
Well, I think that's a good point. And I think, Mercedes, you touched on it earlier. There's so much manifestor conditioning out there. It's like, there's like,
especially like from our parents too, because
just go do it, make it happen, go work hard, or go take initiative. And, and then we're also in these situations where we're being kind of asked at an early age to figure ourselves out before we've lived on the planet long enough. So it's like, from an astrological point of view, and also with human design, it's the Saturn return is kind of the time at around 28, 29, when we get to really get a sense of what this life is about. Like, who are we? Saturn's gone all the way around the wheel, and it's gone through every house, or you could say every gate of the body graph. And at that point, we kind of have this possibility of like, okay, now I kind of know what this is about. But we're usually asking our kids, when they're teens, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? All that stuff. Go out there and do it. We're kind of starting off on pretty shaky ground without a sense of what we're even about yet. And there's so much conditioning for that.
And I guess like you could say like, because I started to want to ask you like, well, what's the best thing we can do as parents to projectors, or as parents to generators, or manifesting generators? Like, what's the best way we can serve each of them? But I guess the best way for all of them is to just not try to condition them and to allow them to be who they are naturally. I know probably projectors, what do you think, Mercedes, since you're a projector?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't know what my dad is, but I can see exactly like where I got the tendencies that I have as a projector to be overly.
So he probably wasn't a projector.
Maybe he was a projector. I don't know. I don't know his birth time, so I'd have to ask him and figure that out. But I can see that some of my conditioning came from just generally the people around me, especially in my early life. And the way I use it, though, in my life today, when I'm using it against my strategy, outside of my strategy, doesn't work well for me. So a lot of it always comes back to, how can I be more in the flow? How can I soften here? How can I stop trying? Well,
I was more curious about from a parent or a partner, how we can better serve a projector generator or manifesting generator. But I also know, like, just looking into their charts, when I thought I was a projector, I remember reading that like projectors need a lot more time to wind down before bed, and it's best that they sleep alone. Like there's all these like things. And I know my projector son shares a bunk bed with his generator sister. So there's just, I guess, a bunch of tools in parenting when you actually look into what your child is and what that means for them.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep and important subject, I think. I grew up in a family of 3 generators, both my parents and my brother. And I had obviously no idea that I was a projector back then. And I was the crazy one. I was bouncing off the walls. I was running around like a lunatic half the time. And they ended up putting me on Ritalin and diagnosing me with ADHD. And I can look back on that and go, wow, maybe I was just amplifying all the energy in the house and I had no idea what was going on, and so I think just having the awareness of like your kid's design, on a pretty simple level, like, okay, I'm dealing with a projector who's really open, or I'm dealing with a manifesting generator who's very defined, very fixed in a way. And if we can kind of meet them as they are using human design as a point of reference, I think it can really go a long way. And then there's more specific things we can do in terms of like the protocols of interaction, where generators tend to do best when they have something specific to respond to. So you can ask a generator, like, would you like to questions? Would you like to do this? That questions that can be kind of answered with yes or no, that they can then take inventory or check in within themselves. And you can kind of support that process. Where projectors, it needs to be a little bit more specific than that. Like it's almost inviting their awareness and saying, hey, what are you seeing? What are you interested in? And not kind of putting that generator pressure or trip on them, which is, you need to get out there and work and be productive and do all this stuff. It's like eventually going to lead to some stage of burnout or exhaustion. And then there's some dietary stuff too on it in the deeper levels of human design, where you can see specifically what support their body needs at a young age, and like certain ways of eating or eating conditions that can be supportive to their digestion and their body as they're growing and developing. And just with a little bit of that knowledge, you can really make a difference as well.
Yeah. And for those of you who want to dig that deep into it, you can book a session with John through metamorphichumandesign.com.
Yep.
Correct? Yeah. Okay. I was also curious, because I know that you served with La Familia for a while, how human design can be used in conjunction with plant medicine for both preparation and integration.
Yeah, I was never serving medicine with them.
But you worked with them. Sorry.
But I did a lot of work with those guys, and they're close friends of mine. And it's interesting too, from the point of view of human design, in that both plant medicine and ayahuasca came into my life roughly at the same time, within, I would say, 6 months of each other.
Both ayahuasca and human design.
Yeah, about 6 years ago. And I had heard about human design through a friend, as I mentioned earlier. And then I got invited to do a retreat by another friend of mine to go and do a 3-day ayahuasca retreat. And I did that as I was still kind of like getting my feet into the human design material and working with that. And they both kind of took on this kind of like complementary, interwoven kind of role in my life of what I think is ultimately deconditioning. Like I was able through, like I said, with human design, in kind of understanding what it meant to be a projector, how my energy was designed to work, having a basic understanding of my body graph, just to start experimenting with that. And often that looks like just letting go of stuff. Like, okay, I'm not going to maybe do that anymore, or maybe I'll try this thing. And it's kind of just offloading things that just aren't really healthy for me or that weren't working for me. And then I go into the plant medicine experience, and it's going kind of directly into the body and bringing up all sorts of stuff that I didn't know that I was even carrying around, like, trauma that I thought that I had already kind of addressed or dealt with. I realized that I had kind of a lot of emotional work to do. I was really shut down in certain areas, which I associate with kind of the deconditioning of my solar plexus. I have an open solar plexus. And so, yeah, it kind of evolved into this kind of exploration where both of them were kind of working at the same time. And I feel like what human design was really doing was giving me a point of reference for my mind, really, to work with as all these things were being let go of or being cleaned out or released. I feel like plant medicine can be kind of destabilizing, and that's why there's the need for like community and integration work around that. And then human design can give us a point of reference, like, all right, maybe I can get my bearings, with experimenting with my strategy and authority, for example, or profile, which is another important piece of human design as a point of reference. So yeah, that's kind of the quick version of it. But yeah, I do see these things go hand in hand, or they can. Really
yeah.
I've also heard on I believe it was also podcasts you did, speaking about how when people go into a plant medicine journey, sometimes they even visualize human design before knowing about human design. They visualize something like their chart or seeing something that they would later understand was maybe related to human design when they get introduced to that modality later. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, that's been pretty prominent in my experiences in that space. I've had a lot of human design visions. I don't know if it's just my own consciousness and programming, but I had a specific instance, early on, where it was almost like the medicine was showing me my body graph and saying, you really take this in. You need to get that this is an imprint of your energy. And that was when human design was still pretty new to me. And so, yeah, it felt like it was always kind of part of that experience. And then I had other experiences where I would see the wheel, the body graph, the mandala, as it's called in human design, which is this pretty complex kind of map. And I was just kind of deconstructing it and taking it apart in that space. And I have a lot of people come in who've either come out of sessions working with different plant medicines who had heard about human design and they're looking again for another point of reference, or they're going into it, like kind of you're saying, and then they're kind of integrating it or working with it in that space. So, what I think what's going on is that both of those things have the potential to kind of bring us back to a more authentic, true experience of ourselves. Ayahuasca tends to kind of work pretty intensely within the form in the body, but then it kind of brings up stuff in the emotions and the mind and our energy field, where human design tends to enter in through the mind, but it's really taking us to the body. So it's kind of the same destination, but different ways of getting at it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, all wholeness. And so before we move on to our staple questions, I really wanted to get into the 2027 shift with you, if you're willing.
So 2027, there's something of, I don't know if it's called I wouldn't call it a prophecy, but there was a little bit of kind of a predictive forecast that came through the knowledge when it was transmitted to this guy Ra that we're referring to.
And is this the first prophecy, or have others come true in the past?
Well, he did point out some things, like he had identified certain things like the existence of something called neutrinos, which are these very small, like subatomic particles, so the smallest kind of known particles in the universe. And he was pointing to those, and he said that these things exist. And then I think it was years later that science came out and then finally like established it through scientific methods. And so he had a pretty good track record, I think. And when he was talking about 2027, he was referring to what are called the global cycle changes. And this is kind of a change of the background frequency, the cosmic background frequency that we're all swimming in right now, the earth, all of humanity, with this idea that's kind of connected to the precession of the equinoxes in astrology, where there's that kind of a gradual movement of, the relative position of our earth with the North Star and these fixed points in space, where basically the energies and the frequencies are changing. We've been in a 400-year period called the cross of planning. It's spoke about in terms of these crosses, which are basically a combination of 4 gates in the wheel that are kind of associated with it. And there's multiple crosses and multiple cycles, but the basic idea is that we're moving from this cross of planning, which started in the early 1600s, and it ends in 2027, and we enter in a new 400-year cycle for humanity, and it's called the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And they have very different energies in each of these contexts. And so the cross of planning was about, you could say, the building of institution, governments, all kind of based on this kind of tribal bargain system of, a division of labor. We're all in this together, and we're going to make these agreements. And through that, we're going to be able to really focus and develop technologies. We're going to be able to kind of perfect these you could almost say materialistic patterns of the world, where we develop iPhones, and we've got Amazon Prime and all. You can kind of think of like everything that goes into making an iPhone or getting an Amazon delivery the next day here. What Ra was saying is that was all a result of the cross of planning, that the background frequency supported that. And part of that was like kind of the institution of marriage and how we're coming together and the bonds that we have. And from the point of view of the human design system and these changing global cycles, all of that is kind of fading away. It's starting to transition into a new time period, a new context. And the cross of the sleeping phoenix looks very different. First of all, there's this mutation of emotional awareness, the solar plexus, that's a part of this, where there's this kind of greater potential for spirit awareness or emotional intelligence, emotional awareness coming. We're also seeing a lot of changes in terms of how we relate with others, in terms of intimacy. We're seeing changes to like the reproductive rate and like the birth rate of the planet. That was part of what he saw. And then the kind of one of the big things is that there's a move towards more individual activity in the world, a more individual orientation to life, where it's going to be more about us kind of using our energy as empowered individuals in order to survive, versus, kind of like this more collective, you could say institutional kind of support system that we have in place. We're already kind of seeing it, I think, with some of the problems that governments are having around the world. There's kind of a loss of faith in institutions and the corporate world and the government, institutions, politicians. So that's kind of the quick version of it. Do you have any questions or?
Well, I just add that I even see that happening in our religious dogma. There's some sort of disillusion happening there as well, where we're coming to systems like human design that allow for more experimentation and dancing with ideas and getting a broader option. Or I think before you came on, John called it God's breath. Like this idea that God's breathed on everything. So you can attain or gain some sort of insight about self or your own inner God and your own inner spiritual experience by just playing and dancing in the world. It doesn't have to be like at a church with this, specific dogma and following these specific rules. That structure was important and it's powerful for what it is, but we can now see outside of that some.
I totally agree. I think you're exactly right that is also kind of an example of how that cross of planning kind of built all that. And now that it's starting to fade or it's starting to recede, then it opens up new possibilities. And that orientation of spirit that I mentioned, it's individual. It's basically there's a move towards the individual, and you can already kind of see that out in the world that, there's kind of how to say it there. it can be challenging to be an individual in some of the collective context or the tribal context. And so that's the movement. And you can kind of look at these changing global cycles as what's called the program in human design, which is this cosmic clockwork of planetary influences and background frequencies that actually support and kind of inform the experience that we're having on this world. Humans kind of have this type of vanity where we think that we're actually doing all of this, but sometimes it feels or looks a lot more like it's just happening. Like it's happening, we're going along for the ride in a way. And
this depends on how far we zoom out, right?
How far we zoom out, exactly.
Yeah, that's totally, that makes so much sense. We get so busy in our own little worlds and we think that it's all the world's revolving around us, right? But at the end of the day, we are nature, we're part of it.
Yeah, that was my point. Yeah, this is nature.
Yeah.
So does it mean, like, if Ra is correct, that we're not moving towards communism, but also, like you say, individual? And I was thinking too that, like, possibly in the future we would be living more communally. So I was a little confused on which one it was.
So yeah, that's a good question. I have a sense of, well, I have a personal sense of it. And I feel like that when we talk about like communism or like the collective society as a whole, I don't think that that's ultimately gonna take root. I don't think that nature and these frequencies that we're talking about will ultimately support that. I think that we're going to see a continued breakdown of, again, these large institutions, even though what we're seeing now may be kind of, that is like the last, dying gasp or thrust of the whole thing. It's like, okay, we're going to try to hold on to whatever control we can. But I think in the end, nature will win, and it's going to put us back in an individual direction. And when it comes to like questions of community, I think what we're going to see are smaller, more regional communities that are based on more about kind of resonance, like this, like who do we actually connect with? Who's actually correct or healthy for us, rather than a lot of maybe more surface type stuff, like, our birth family or, our race or our church or our group or whatever. It's going to, I think, going to reorganize and reform in these smaller, more regional pockets is my sense.
Yeah. And I want to just say that, like, the way that I see it is from the sense of what we're attracted to now in this like kind of hipster culture is the gypsy or the vagabond or that kind of loner essence. Even the nerd is on the rise, right? Like, so all these things where you think of it as a singular person who's out there deciding to kind of pioneer and, cut what do you call it? Blaze a trail, you know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. They're making their own way. I think that is actually about communing rather than community, but it all leads back to the whole. It all leads back to remembering the parts of you that make you whole. Therefore, or then you're able to add to the community in a really healthy and serviceful way. And I think that's like kind of for me, that's what it feels like anyway, is like we're moving towards this direction of doing the inner work, which is very individual. However, it adds to the whole in the community.
Yeah.
Collective conscious.
I think that's a good point. Ra had this phrase, which I really like, which I think is what you're speaking to, which was communion of awareness. And, it's like there is a coming together, and there's going to be a resonance and a certain frequency that we share, but I think it's going to look different than what we've seen in the past. And I think that it's going to organize more around, hopefully around like what is actually true and correct for us and healthy, and what is our proper role and what are we here for. I think we've been kind of far off track of that
that's really beautiful too, because it's so much of what we do on this show. We call it journeying into the gray, and it's about, as humans so far, or in this period like you're talking about, we have been attempting to control and create the structure and know what's coming next, because it's so scary not to know what's in that gray area, what's in that beyond, right? But I think that this paradigm that we're stepping into now is about, can we be brave enough to stand, hold the pose as, we know we're worthy to stand here and step on the edge and like look into the gray or look into what else might be out there that we can't even predict, because we're trying to predict from control and from structure.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that fluidity. That's right. All right. So there's a few short questions I'd like to ask everyone who comes on the show. So first off, John, if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
I would probably say just be yourself and it will all be okay.
Yeah, I love that. If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
Oh, this is a little bit more tough, I think. I've gone through so many important books over different points in my life. But if I were to narrow it down, I think early on, one of the books that really had an influence on me was the Tao Te Ching. And just in terms of this way of kind of aligning more with the natural order of things. And I think there's a lot of deep wisdom in that. And when it comes to just that, that way of looking at it in terms of nature. Mm-hmm. And if I were to pick something a little bit more recent, I really had a pretty profound experience with a book by a guy named Adyashanti. Are you guys familiar with Adyashanti? Mm-hmm. He's kind of I would say maybe a modern Buddhist influence. Mm-hmm. And he's also a mental projector, and interestingly enough, and it's kind of for the same reasons as I mentioned the Tao Te Ching, in that I think they're both kind of pointing to a deeper nature or order of things, and in different ways. And the book from Adyashanti that I'm thinking of is called Emptiness Dancing.
Emptiness Dancing.
And it's kind of a collection of his talks, but it reads really well like a book. And
how do you spell that first one?
It's Adyasha.
Sorry, not his name, but the Tao Te Ching or whatever.
Oh, Tao Te Ching. Yeah.
Yeah. It's TaoTeching.
Okay.
It's very famous. Word. Google will know if you just voice text. Okay. If anyone's listening and wants to figure that one out.
He was I think a 6th century BC Chinese sage who wrote this text, and there are these small passages. It's you could find like in a little pocketbook format almost. And there's kind of contemplations and reflections, but they're all kind of pointing to this natural order of things, which it's considered one of the classic texts of Taoism. And I think there's just a resonance for me personally, because human design is really kind of a Taoist system in a way, which maybe it's not talked about that way very much, but with the I Ching and just the kind of coming back to nature, I feel like there's a real resonance there.
I think it's interesting that here in the West that it seems like the further east it goes, the further out we are from knowing it. I don't know if that makes sense. So like we're talking about chakra systems right now. We're talking about, we now enhanced to 9 of them with human design, but then the Tao Te Ching, like being even further out, and I don't know if it's distance that for some reason we feel like we grasp it differently when you're looking at the map that way. But something that brought to mind that I did want to touch on before I finish off with this last question for you was you talked about the Tao Te Ching, and you talked about how it brought you to this understanding of how nature plays such a significant role that you maybe at the time when you came to that book weren't allowing to resonate as much for you. And I wondered if maybe you were coming from more of like a science-based place at the time, and then coming to this work in astrology and so much of what human design has to do with. What was the factor in human design that someone who coming to this with like a very skeptical mind, maybe because it's astrology based in a large way, could see that this, not trying to make it a science product, because this is, like I said, it's a dance and it's an experiment. If it resonates, right? But what is it about this system that does cement it a little bit, that does ground it a little bit to where we can go, okay, yeah, let me see if this holds something for me?
Yeah, well, just the way you're saying that, I think is the right way to approach it, is as a experiment or an investigation of sorts. Like, don't take it as a belief system or dogma or rule book that you've got to like apply to your life, but look at it more as like points of reference, signposts. Then you can say, all right, there's this thing called strategy. If I'm a projector, let me just kind of look back on my life and look at when things really went well, or when I really felt seen or recognized, or I had this experience of success. How did that come to me? Did I go out there and make it happen, or did it come through a relationship? Did it come through someone asking me? So we can kind of, I think if all this information stays up in the mind and it becomes like just an intellectual process, I don't think it really does a lot more than just satisfy some interest or curiosity. And I feel like it's really about kind of coming back to what works, the natural order of things, that kind of the nature connection. And when I was first introduced to astrology, it was by my mother when I was pretty young, and I didn't want to hear any of it. I was ignorantly skeptical. I was just like, if it's coming from my mom, I'm not interested. It's weird. And then my brother actually was the one who went and agreed to go get a reading with her astrologer first, and came back and convinced me to do it. So I go in very skeptical, and And then over the course of the reading, I was like, all right, this guy knows way too much about me. He's saying stuff that I've only thought in my head. How is he doing this? And then I guess the projector part of me clicked on, and I'm like, I need to know everything about this.
Yeah.
As my own exploration. So that started off astrology. But by the time human design showed up, I was also still kind of skeptical. I was like, oh no, another system. But just like I said, hearing and understanding a little bit about what it meant to be a projector was enough that I was like, let's experiment. Let's go a little bit further. And I think that that's really the best way to do it. People have to come do it on their own. They have to feel a resonance with it. It has to be in the right time. And I don't control any of that. If someone shows up for a session with me, I'll show up and give them my best. But after that point, it's kind of it's on them, to live their life or not. And so I would always point people back to their own direct experience, to themselves, and that's I think what the connection or the thread is with like the Emptiness Dancing book by Adyashanti and the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah, I got to pick that up for sure. The Emptiness Dancing sounds fascinating. And you mentioned the neutrinos as well, and I know that's something to do with like the exact time, place, and moment you were born being why you suddenly are part of this type and such, right?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's this neutrino field, which is this like sea of neutrinos that's just going through every corner of the universe. It's like they're penetrating everything. That's kind of the medium or the substance. And I'm not speaking in scientific terms. I'm kind of conceptually how I understand it, that the planets are filtering through. So it's like we're getting the imprint of the planets through this neutrino field. And then it's relative to our time, date, and place that we're born, there's a relationship between us and the cosmos that we can kind of read from this imprint. And we have those two different charts. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we've got the black and the red, the conscious and the unconscious, or you could say personality and design. And then you get a sense of like, okay, well, this is me, and then with that basic understanding, you can experiment with operating from that place or not. Go out there and keep doing the things you're doing and see what happens. It really is kind of an experimental process.
Beautiful. Yes. It's a dance I hope you all feel invited to listening to this today. All right. So if you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would that be?
It'd probably be along the lines of what I would tell my younger self, that I would, want to just say, trust yourself, just tune in and listen to what your body's telling you, and see what happens. It will probably be okay. And I think, to simplify that a little bit, one of the things that Ra would always close his talks and with his emails was love yourself, which is really, I think, the kind of the foundation of it all, is a type of self-acceptance and self-love. And from there, I think a lot more becomes possible.
Beautiful.
Okay. Before we let you go, where can everybody find you online?
So I've got two websites. I have my personal practice website. It's called metamorphichumandesign.com. And that's where I offer sessions. And if people are interested in getting like an intro to human design, it's called the Foundation Reading. It's a really good place to start, and other type of services. And then there's also the Human Design Collective, which I run with my partner, Amy, who teaches classes and workshops in human design with me. And so humandesigncollective.com, and there's some course offerings, some workshops, there's a blog, and we have a podcast as well, Human Design Collective podcast. So those are all places that you can find me.
Amazing. Awesome.
This has been so enlightening, John. I just know by listening, I love when we have something on our show that's kind of new to us and our audience, because then we have to go and study it and that's something that super excites me. So maybe because I'm a projector. And this has been one of those things where, like I said, when I was listening to some of your work and I was having that piece of my strategy explained to me of wait for the invitation, I like burst out into tears. And I was like, it's just one of those moments where you just knew that message is for me. Like I need that message. I needed to know that thing. I needed to hear it in order to really just go, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that and I'm going to add that to my arsenal. Yeah. And it has already changed my life just in the few weeks that I've been using that strategy. So I can't say enough about how I appreciate that the work you're doing in this lifetime is adding healing to me and so many others. So we just appreciate you and thank you for being a light.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invitation to join you today. And yeah, it's been a fun discussion. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, John. So we are going to send you all this good stuff once it's edited. We'll probably make a promo for it, and we'll have, of course, the full episode as well. We're working on our YouTube channel, so maybe we'll have the video episode up also. I'm working on that this week. Jay, do you know the launch date for this? You said it's next
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
3 weeks. And I'm going to have to hit you up for a
foundation.
reading. What do you call it? Yeah. A foundational reading, I guess, because I definitely want to dive into that with you as well.
Okay. Yeah. It's being a mental person is a little tricky. So I think what you were kind of getting at earlier is I feel like human design can benefit everyone, but it's almost critical knowledge for projectors.
Yeah.
It's like, generators, it's definitely helpful, but you can kind of work it out in the world. And most generators already have kind of a sense of like, a gut response or an energetic response to life. But projectors, it's just kind of a different thing. It's like we don't have a whole lot of support, currently for what we are basically in this world. And human design can be really helpful, really supportive, I think.
Yeah, I'm so glad I've found it. So this is just the beginning of the journey.
All right.
All right, John. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll email you all the promo videos and stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
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 All right. That's so much information.
I know. I think we always take like a deep breath at the end of an interview, because it's just like
absorb, like a pot. Yeah. The time for pausing.
Yeah.
You're like soaking in. Yeah.
I know. And I love just being able, first of all, I love that we get to record these and listen back and like live in this work for as long as we need to. I'm so grateful we started this podcast, Jade. Think of all the amazing things that have come into our lives specifically because of it, just because of needing to do the research for it.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your magic today?
Mine is a compassion exercise. And I know that I have done a few compassion exercises as magic tricks in the past, but this one's different. This one can be done with a certain person in mind, like someone you're struggling with forgiveness for, someone that you love, or you could just do it as you're walking around the airport or the mall or, the beach, wherever you're at, on the people that are around you. So there's 5 steps, but they're very quick. So step 1 is like, in each of these steps, your attention is on this one person.
Okay.
So step 1 is you think to yourself and like repeat in your heart, just like me, this person is seeking some happiness for his or her life. Step 2, just like me, this person is trying to avoid suffering in his or her life. Step 3, just like me, this person has known sadness, loneliness, and despair. Step 4, just like me, this person is seeking to fulfill his or her needs. And step 5, just like me, this person is learning about life. So you can do that focused on your partner. You can do that focused on a parent, or like, I know I've done it just sitting in a coffee shop, like thinking about the person who's ordering coffee. So it's just a good way to cultivate compassion in yourself. And yeah, it's like one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. I like just even the mantra, just like me, because it'll remind you of those things, like
the connection.
How do I see what does Tom Shadyac say? God in a myriad of his disguises. That's who everyone around you is.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it. Just like me. Me.
Okay. What about you?
My magic trick today is if you couldn't have got it from our episode already, I'm just going to remind you at the end of our show here to try out your human design strategy for 1 week, just a strategy. If nothing else, you allow to sink in, or, there's a lot, as we talked about on the show today. So just a strategy. So get your human design chart, look at what your strategy is, and try it out for 1 week. And I'm going to remind you right now of the strategies for each type. So generators who have an open and enveloping aura and need to learn about themselves, generators, your strategy is to respond. And through response, to find satisfaction and avoid frustration. Projectors have a focused and absorbing aura and need to learn about and understand the other. And projectors, your strategy is to wait for the invitation to find success and avoid bitterness. And then manifests have a closed and repelling aura and are here to understand their impact on others. Manifestors, your strategy is to inform before they act, to find peace and avoid anger. Reflectors have a resistant and sampling aura and are learning to reflect rather than identify. Reflectors, your strategy is to wait a full cycle of the moon before making decisions.
That's hard.
And to find clarity, leading to a life of more surprise and less disappointment. So just for the week, guys, try out your human design strategy. See how
Yeah.
it
And you can
could
also ask yourself, why do I feel resistant to using my strategy or my authority? You can also ask yourself that, because there's probably
that's big time. I
Yeah.
definitely immediately, I mean, I burst into tears, not just because I was like, oh, I need to do this, but because I was like, all this, like, basically I had all this resistance come up that was literally painful to think that I've been making things happen and pushing things to happen when I should just be waiting for the invitation.
And like we said in the beginning, this isn't like meant to be rigid or to like put yourself so much in the box, but it is a way to practice self-acceptance when you look at, okay, this is just how I am by design, instead of disliking that part about yourself.
Yeah, because
if that comes up for you.
It does get rigid when we're trying to like label ourselves and say, I am a projector and that type of thing. But it also can be really helpful if you use it with that in mind, that this is an experiment. So try
and just a practice of self-acceptance too.
Yeah. Be easy with yourself.
Yeah. All right, Magic Mobbers, thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey with us. If this episode held some magic for you, please share it with your friends and family. This would mean so much to us. And don't forget to join us on our Instagram page at The Magic Hour and let us know what your favorite episodes have been so far. We appreciate all of your feedback and want to know what's lighting you up.
Yes, guys, we really, really do. Please send us that review. It means the world to us. And you know that we release a new episode every Monday, so you can catch us again next week or go listen to some of our past episodes in our podcast library now. We'll meet you there. Until then,
be a light.